Picture in your mind the planet Earth as you currently know it. Think of the cities, roads, fields, fences, farms, African deserts, polar ice, and fragmented forests. Now, imagine removing every single one of these features from existence. Erase every modification that human hands have ever made to the land. The remaining landscape represents the original environment that your ancestors first encountered. This was a planet so wild, loud, and densely populated that you would find no part of it familiar. It was a world where the Sahara was a green savanna with rivers and hippos, where the night sky cast shadows, and where the ground shook under animals we have since wiped out. This presentation describes that specific version of our planet. Rather than presenting textbook history, this account reconstructs the physical reality of the world when humans first emerged. It details the visual appearances, the ambient sounds, and the creatures moving through the dark. This reconstruction is necessary because the modern world is merely a diminished, silent, and depleted remnant of the past. When Homo sapiens first developed approximately 300,000 years ago, the continent looked completely different. Consider the geographic region of the Sahara as a primary example. Today, this area is the largest hot desert on Earth, covering 9 million square kilometers of sand and rock. However, 10,000 years ago, this entire region was covered in lush vegetation. It featured thick grasslands, trees, rivers, and lakes populated by fish. Large hippopotamuses made their homes in these bodies of water. Herds of elephants traveled freely across the fertile landscape. Ancient humans fished and hunted in a territory that has now transformed into an extremely hostile environment. Researchers refer to this historical period as the Green Sahara. Physical proof of this wet period can be found throughout the region. This evidence includes ancient riverbeds visible from satellites, cave paintings of swimming people, and crocodile bones buried under the sand. What factors caused this dramatic environmental transformation? The transition resulted partly from climate shifts and partly from livestock stripping the vegetation, which altered how the land reflected sunlight. A lush landscape was slowly baked into desert, partly because humans arrived with goats. This type of environmental change was not limited to Africa. Immense forests once grew in geographic zones that are currently dominated by deserts. Europe was covered by ancient, mature forests so dense that early humans often could not walk straight through them. During the ice ages, global ocean levels were positioned significantly lower. Large landmasses now underwater were exposed, enabling people to walk between continents on land bridges that no longer exist. Visualizing the prehistoric animals is difficult because the creatures that coexisted with your ancestors were unlike anything alive today. Across the European territory, large cave lions hunted throughout the landscape. These were not modern lions, as they were 25% larger and adapted to cold climates. Humans painted them on cave walls at Chauvet in France, demonstrating that they encountered them frequently. Those same cave systems were shared with cave bears weighing up to 500 kilograms. Shelter in these caves was not free, as humans competed with these predators for occupancy. The variety of prehistoric wildlife in the Americas resembles a collection from a fantasy novel. This included short-faced bears standing 6 feet at the shoulder, the most dangerous land predators on the continent. Giant ground sloths 10 feet long and weighing over 2,000 pounds walked on their knuckles because of their large claws. Heavily armored glyptodonts, which resembled biological tanks, reached the physical dimensions of a car. These species lived alongside dire wolves, American lions, mastodons, woolly mammoths, and horses, which actually evolved in the Americas and disappeared 10,000 years ago when humans arrived. The animal life in prehistoric Australia was even more unusual. This included the Diprotodon, a giant marsupial the size of a rhinoceros. There were also predatory marsupial lions in Megalania, a giant monitor lizard 7 meters long that was still alive when humans reached the continent 50,000 years ago. A reptile the size of a car, equipped with teeth, watched you from the grass. In addition to these regional species, mammoths were present across the landscape. These large herbivores were not uncommon sights. They formed a standard part of the environment, much like domesticated cattle are a common feature of our landscapes today. Humans hunted these animals, painted their likenesses, and utilized their bones to construct shelters. The final woolly mammoth perished 4,000 years ago on an Arctic island while the Egyptian pyramids were already standing. Mammoths still walked the earth during the period when humans were building the Sphinx. What caused the disappearance of these massive creatures? Wherever humans arrived, including Africa, Europe, the Americas, and Australia, the large animals vanished within a few thousand years. Changing climate conditions played a role, but the pattern is too consistent and too closely timed with human arrival to ignore. The planet that your ancestors inherited was populated by giant animals. The world they left behind was not. During this era, artificial light pollution did not exist, as there was not a single electric light on Earth. The night sky was completely dark in a manner that almost nobody alive today has ever experienced. The Milky Way shone brightly on every clear night, emitting enough light to cast a faint shadow. Every single star was visible. Today, a third of the global population cannot see the Milky Way from where they live. Your ancestors observed this brilliant celestial display during every single night of their lives. This clear view of the heavens was not just beautiful, it was functional. The movements of the stars functioned as their calendar. Certain star clusters rose at predictable times, signaling when to migrate and when rains were coming. The Pleiades appear in the mythology of indigenous cultures on every continent, including ones with zero contact, suggesting humans tracked that cluster before spreading out of Africa over 100,000 years ago. The sky was a shared text every human on Earth was reading simultaneously before writing existed. Solar and lunar eclipses represented some of the most terrifying events possible. The sun dying in the middle of the day without warning caused great alarm. Prior to the control of fire, half of every human life was spent in total darkness. After fire, the circle of light around a campfire was everything. Beyond it, the night was absolute. The ancient world was loud. This noise was not city loud, but alive loud. Insect swarms generated continuous walls of sound. Bird populations were so massive that migrations darkened the sky. The passenger pigeon alone numbered in the billions. Frog choruses around every water source were deafening in warm months. Whale song carried hundreds of miles through oceans with no engine noise to compete with. Herds were so large the ground vibrated as they moved. Rivers were clear enough to see the bottom. Salmon runs were so thick the water appeared to boil. The oceans held whale populations several times what they are today, before commercial whaling began in the 17th century. Living in a world that full carried specific consequences. It was also a world that full of death. Your ancestors were not watching from a safe distance. They were in it. They were prey as often as they were predators. They drank from the same rivers as animals that could kill them, sleeping on the same ground as things that hunted at night. Every sound mattered. Every shift in animal behavior was information. They monitored which way a herd moved, what the wind carried, and where water was. They read these signs constantly because missing them could mean dying. Their nervous system was tuned to that world. Ours still is underneath. The fear responses, the hyper-awareness, and the instincts were all built for that environment. We just live in a world where they fire at phone notifications instead of actual predators. So, what was the world like when ancient humans were alive? It was a green Sahara, endless forests, skies so dark the stars cast shadows, oceans packed with life, giants on every continent, and rivers so clear you could feed a camp in an afternoon. And then we happened. Everywhere humans spread, the world got quieter. The giants disappeared, the forests shrank, and the sky filled with light that drowned the stars, so gradually that nobody noticed until it was already gone. What is left is still beautiful, but it is a fraction of what once existed, emptied out and quieted down over thousands of years until the people living in it do not even know what is missing. Your ancestors were born into something extraordinary. The further we get from it, the less we remember it was ever lost.